If you walked into one of Europe's largest, most respected medical centers, say the Charité University Hospital over in Berlin, and a doctor there suggested treating your severe chronic pain by just, hovering their hands over your body, you'd probably immediately look for the nearest exit.
Right, yeah. You'd think it was a joke.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds completely out there. Yet at that very hospital, patients with these really complex conditions actually experienced an 85% reduction in pain by doing exactly that. And that tension, that friction between modern clinical skepticism and ancient invisible practices, that is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. Today we are looking at some incredible excerpts from Torsten Alange's book, Reiki Made Easy: Heal Your Body and Your Life with the Power of Universal Energy. And our mission for you today is to basically strip away all those vague buzzwords that usually surround energy healing.
Yeah, the stuff that makes people roll their eyes.
Right. We're going to examine the granular history, the actual mechanical claims,
Yeah.
and the underlying philosophy of this massive global phenomenon. Whether you're a total skeptic or already a fan, we want to figure out what it actually is and how it claims to work.
And, the framework Lange provides in this text is what really makes it worth dissecting. He positions Reiki not just as this localized alternative therapy for, like, a sprained ankle.
Right. It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. It's a systemic convergence of physical healing, personal development, and spiritual awakening all tied together. It's this model that basically suggests you can't fundamentally cure a physical symptom without addressing the architecture of the entire person.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the context of how this practice even emerged is, I think, crucial to understanding how it supposedly works. Torsten Lange didn't just start his career as some mystic living in a cave somewhere.
No, not at all.
He was a highly successful entrepreneur. He had a flagship retail store right on London's Regent Street. But then he faces rapid bankruptcy and sudden homelessness. It completely dismantled his reality. He actually writes that he was pushed to the absolute brink of suicide.
Yeah, it's a very heavy origin story.
It is. And it was in that exact moment of sheer desperation that he encountered Reiki and basically used it to piece his psychology and his life back together.
And what's really fascinating here is how that modern trajectory of just absolute material loss completely mirrors the origin of Reiki's founder, Mikao Usui.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, Usui was born way back in 1865 into a samurai family during the Meiji Restoration in Japan. And this was an era where the samurai class was basically being systematically stripped of all its historical privileges and income. So his family lost their traditional sake brewery.
Oh, man. So he's already starting from a place of loss.
Exactly. Usui eventually moved to Tokyo. He worked for a prominent politician named Shinpei Goto, built his own businesses, and then, much like the author of our source text, he failed catastrophically, just went completely bankrupt.
So you have this guy carrying the psychological weight of a proud, displaced samurai heritage, and suddenly he loses his livelihood, his status, his ability to even provide for his family.
Right, it's total devastation.
So he enters this period of intense searching. Right. He actually joins a Zen monastery and spends 3 whole years there. But he isn't just looking to casually meditate. He's searching for a highly specific state called Anshin Ritsume.
Which is a very particular concept.
Yeah, it's not just a fleeting sense of calm after a good yoga session or whatever. It is an unshakable, profound peace known in the very core of your being. Like, it's completely independent of anything happening externally. But after 3 years of monastic discipline, he still doesn't have it.
Which must have been incredibly frustrating.
For sure. So the abbot basically tells him that the only remaining path is to go to the mountains and prepare to die.
Which sounds extreme to us, but this was a well-documented, formalized path for Eastern mountain ascetics at the time. The whole psychological mechanism here is total detachment.
Right, by stripping away food and shelter.
Exactly. By going up Mount Kurama without the basic guarantees of survival, the ascetic basically forces their ego and their biological survival instincts to just collapse. So Usui goes into total isolation and he fasts. And after 3 weeks of this extreme physiological stress, he experiences what Japanese Buddhism calls satori.
That's the enlightenment phase, right?
Yeah. He describes it as being struck by this blindingly bright light, this moment of sudden, profound enlightenment where the perception of an isolated individual self just dissolves. It turns into a feeling of total, uninterrupted connection to the entire universe.
Which is an incredible breakthrough.
Yeah.
But then right after he achieves this ultimate cosmic connection, he starts walking down the mountain, and he immediately trips over some tree roots and literally tears off his toenail.
Talk about coming back down to earth quickly.
Right. So he instinctively reaches down, grabs his bleeding toe, and instead of feeling this throbbing pain, he feels an intense radiating heat coming from his own hands. The pain subsides, and the torn tissue actually begins to heal rapidly.
It's like the spiritual breakthrough somehow manifested as a physical, biological capacity.
Exactly. So he tests this hypothesis again at a local inn at the base of the mountain. The innkeeper's daughter is suffering from a really severe swollen toothache. He places his hands on her jaw, the swelling visibly reduces, and the pain stops entirely.
And this is a huge turning point historically, because up until this point in Japanese history, if you discovered a powerful technique like that, you locked it down. You kept it as a guarded, proprietary secret within your family lineage.
So Usui doesn't do that.
No, he intentionally breaks that tradition. He explicitly writes that hoarding a sacred method is a, quote, bad custom of the past. He chooses to democratize it for everyone. And that democratization proved absolutely vital later on during the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, where over 140,000 people died.
Wow, that's unimaginable.
It was devastating. Usui spent his days just treating massive crowds in the rubble, using his hands, his breath, and his gaze to channel this energy.
Okay, I do need to push back on this whole mountain asceticism narrative for a second, though, because we see a very similar mindset today in, like, the culture of extreme biohacking.
Oh yeah, the ice baths and all that.
Exactly. People endure ice baths, intense fasting, or extreme dopamine detoxes, operating on this assumption that severe physical suffering is just the necessary toll you have to pay to unlock higher human performance or spiritual clarity. So if Usui gained this profound biological ability through near starvation, it kind of suggests the deprivation is the active ingredient, right?
Right.
Like, does this framework require a person to endure physiological trauma to access the state Usui achieved?
That is such a great question. It is incredibly tempting to look at Usui's timeline and conclude that suffering is the engine for enlightenment. But what's fascinating here is that the text argues the exact opposite.
Wait, really? The opposite.
Yeah. Usui actually recognized that his path on Mount Kurama was incredibly dangerous, unnecessarily brutal, and totally inaccessible to the average person. His core innovation wasn't surviving the mountain, it was engineering a system so his future students could bypass the trauma altogether.
Oh, I see.
He wanted to extract the final result, that energetic connection, from the extreme ascetic method that provoked it.
Okay, but there is a massive gap between one man achieving enlightenment on a mountain and a modern person receiving healing in a hospital room.
Yeah.
If Usui didn't want his students to starve on a mountain, what was the actual mechanism he invented to transfer that state to them?
Well, the source text grounds this in a physical framework, actually starting with a concept from Albert Einstein.
Right, the quote about matter being simply curdled energy.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. Like, everything we perceive as solid, the chair you are sitting on right now, your own skeleton, or even a biological tumor,
Yeah.
it's theoretically just energy vibrating at a frequency slow enough to become dense and tangible to human senses.
Exactly. And if you accept that premise, that biology is fundamentally quantum energy vibrating at varying frequencies, then the boundary between a physical human body and the space immediately surrounding it becomes highly porous. It's not a hard wall.
And the book actually details an optical exercise to demonstrate this energetic expansion. It instructs you to look at a person standing against a plain white wall. But instead of focusing directly on their physical features, you sort of soften your gaze and look a few inches past their outline.
Right. Engaging your peripheral vision.
Yeah, because peripheral vision has a higher density of rod cells, which are highly sensitive to subtle shifts in light and movement. The text claims that by doing this, you can actually perceive the innermost layer of their energy field, or aura. It's basically a biological hack to visually prove that humans are not contained solid blocks of flesh, but radiating fields.
And that underlying premise of an extended radiating energy field is completely encoded into the word Reiki itself. The author breaks down the Japanese kanji for it.
Yeah, let's look at that. The character for ki, meaning life energy, originally depicted a grain of rice with steam or an aura radiating off it. It represents the fundamental sustenance of biological life.
And then the character for Rei, meaning universal or spiritual, depicts rain falling from heaven with 3 containers, or a shaman, catching that rain below.
So the synthesis of the word Reiki is essentially the process of the human acting as the conscious conduit, catching that universal frequency.
Exactly. But to catch that frequency effectively, you need a structural architecture within the body. Now, a lot of listeners are probably familiar with the Indian system of chakras, but Usui's original Japanese system largely bypasses that model.
Right, they use something different.
Yes, they focus on three primary centers called the tandon points, or the three diamonds. So you have the lower tandon, known as a hara, which sits just below the navel. In Japanese martial arts and philosophy, this is your earth energy. It's raw, grounded, physical power and stability, like a sumo wrestler's center of gravity.
And then you have the upper tandon, which sits at the brow. This is heaven energy, the center for intuition, spiritual receptivity, and accessing non-local information.
Perfect.
If we look at this through a modern systems architecture lens, I like to think of the lower tandon as your hardware and your battery pack. It's dense, physical, it keeps the machine powered on and structurally stable.
I love that analogy.
And then the upper tandon is like your antenna or your Wi-Fi signal. It's continuously pulling down these massive invisible data streams from the cloud that you can't physically see, but you completely rely on to navigate the world.
That's a brilliant way to frame it, and that systems comparison highlights the absolute necessity of the third component, because you have the grounded hardware of the earth and the celestial data stream of heaven, but they need an interface to actually interact.
Right, middle tandon.
Exactly. The middle tandon, located at the heart, this is the energy of oneness. It translates the raw physical power of the earth and the vast abstract data of heaven into empathy, genuine connection, and observable human interaction.
Because without the middle tandon, the hardware is basically just sitting there holding a signal it cannot use. The heart is what actually runs the application, allowing the isolated system to communicate and synchronize with all the other systems around it.
And if human beings are viewed as these complex, interconnected systems of earth, heaven, and heart energy, then a localized physical illness cannot simply be an isolated glitch.
Right, it's a symptom of a larger system error.
Exactly. A malfunctioning cell is viewed as a systemic error originating elsewhere in the architecture. This is exactly why a major institution like the Charité University Hospital in Berlin didn't just casually allow Reiki practitioners into their wards, they officially integrated it.
Which is wild for a Western hospital.
It is, but by running clinical trials alongside traditional pain management, they observed that 85% pain reduction, because the therapy treats the nervous system as a holistic energy field rather than just a collection of isolated mechanical parts.
But within the framework of Reiki, alleviating the physical pain is almost like a secondary byproduct, isn't it?
Yeah, surprisingly it is.
The primary goal is addressing what they call the 5 levels of holistic healing: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and life circumstances. And the book uses this really pragmatic cough analogy to illustrate how these layers interact.
Oh, that analogy really clarifies things.
It really does. So if you develop a severe chronic cough, Western medicine just prescribes an antibiotic or a cough suppressant. The bacteria dies, the cough stops, and the patient is considered medically cured. But the Reiki methodology stops and asks about the root cause, because a physical cure is only temporary if the environment remains toxic. Like perhaps there's hidden dampness in your apartment affecting your life circumstances.
And we can trace that root cause even deeper into the mental and emotional levels. The text poses the question, what if the cough develops subconsciously because the individual is deeply isolated? What if manifesting a physical illness is literally the only reliable, socially acceptable method they have to receive care and touch from other people?
Taking an antibiotic definitely does not cure profound emotional isolation.
Not at all. And deeper still, the text pulls from the Buddhist philosophies that heavily influenced Usui, suggesting the root cause might even be spiritual. It could be the physical manifestation of unresolved trauma, potentially even originating from a past life. Treating the lung tissue without addressing the spiritual anchor is, within this framework, merely painting over a crack in the foundation.
Okay, I have to raise a skeptical flag here on behalf of the listener, because drawing a direct line between catching a standard biological virus and, say, unresolved past life trauma, or a subconscious need for pity, feels like a very slippery slope.
It can definitely sound controversial.
Right, like it flirts heavily with victim blaming. If someone gets sick, telling them they subconsciously manifested their own illness because their spiritual antenna is blocked seems like a fast track to inducing deep psychological guilt over basic biology.
That is a completely fair point. It's a delicate boundary, and it's super easy to look at that concept and assume it assigns blame. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source material actually draws a hard line between blame and agency. Well, it does not suggest a person is at fault for catching a virus or developing a disease. Instead, it suggests they have the agency to examine the broader context of their health. Reiki is strictly positioned as complementary medicine, never an alternative. Like, you absolutely still take the antibiotic for the cough.
Okay, so it works alongside the medicine.
Yes. The philosophical pivot here is the critical distinction the author makes between curing and holing. And that's holing spelled W-H-O-L-I-N-G. Curing is the eradication of a physical symptom. Holing is the integration and balancing of those 5 levels, regardless of what the physical outcome is.
So the framework argues a person can become fundamentally whole without ever actually being physically cured.
Yes, exactly. The book shares this really intense story about the author's father, who contracted necrotizing fasciitis, which is a highly lethal flesh-eating bacteria.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It is. The medical prognosis was grim. Survival was unlikely, and they were about to amputate his leg. The author, who was miles away, spent the entire night performing distance Reiki, and his father experienced a rapid, medically baffling recovery and actually walked out of the hospital with his leg intact.
Wow.
Yeah, that is an instance where physical curing aligned perfectly with holing. But in other cases, the physical disease remains. The holing might manifest as, say, a profound psychological acceptance of mortality, or maybe a sudden resolution of a lifelong family conflict in a patient's final days. The biological body might still fail, but the person is fundamentally healed.
It significantly redefines what a successful treatment even looks like.
Right.
And the author argues this unseen interconnectedness operates on multiple frequencies, extending well beyond just human health. There's this one anecdote of a student finding a dead-looking bumblebee, holding it in her hands and channeling this energy until it literally revives and flies away.
Yeah, the scope is pretty wild.
And then there is a much more complex, almost quantum entanglement scenario detailed in the text. A woman in a Reiki session suddenly perceives a message from her deceased mother warning her about a location called Golden Oak. She relays this cryptic message to her brother, who happens to be a police officer.
And you can imagine how a cop might react to that.
Right. But weeks later, he is dispatched to an incident at Golden Oak Avenue. Because of the inexplicable warning, he approaches the scene with heightened caution, which actually allows him to evade a sudden, lethal attack from a schizophrenic man armed with a knife.
And whether you, as a listener, interpret that event as literal communication with the deceased, or maybe as a highly tuned expression of the upper tendon's intuition accessing non-local environmental data, the underlying mechanism is exactly the same. The energy field is perceiving threats and processing information entirely beyond the capacity of our standard physical senses.
Okay, so if the potential applications range from reviving an insect to perceiving intuitive warnings and altering cellular recovery in a hospital, the immediate question is how an average person actually gains access to this system.
Well, the formal training is divided into 3 distinct levels. You have Shoden, which focuses on the physical application, Okuden, focusing on the mental layer and distance healing, and Shinipiden, which is the master level, focusing on enlightenment.
But the defining characteristic of this entire discipline, which really surprised me, is that level 1 requires absolutely 0 prerequisites.
None. The author notes a student who attended a seminar purely to debunk the practice to a friend. She was fully convinced it was nonsense, only to experience such a profound internal shift that she eventually became a Reiki master herself.
That's hilarious, so it doesn't matter if you believe in it or not.
Exactly. The system does not rely on the student's prior spiritual resume, their meditation history, or their belief in the process. It bypasses all of that because it hinges entirely on a specific mechanism called the attunement, or reiju in Japanese.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We need to examine the actual mechanics of this attunement. It isn't just a classroom lecture where you take notes. It's a specific physical ritual where the teacher interacts with the student to literally switch on the capability.
Right, it's an energetic transfer.
Yeah, and because it is a direct transfer, every single practitioner supposedly holds an unbroken energetic lineage tracing all the way back to Mikao Usui. But what is actually happening in the room, the claim is that you walk in as a normal person, receive this ritual, and instantly walk out with healing hands.
It sounds too good to be true.
It really does. Unlike learning a complex skill like cellular biology or classical piano, which requires years of neuroplastic adaptation and grueling practice, this is described almost exactly like an over-the-air software update straight to your biological hard drive.
That is the perfect way to describe it. The ritual involves the teacher using specific symbols and intentions to clear the energetic pathways of the student, primarily focusing on the crown, the heart, and the palms of the hands. By temporarily merging their highly refined energy field with the student's field, the teacher forces the student's system to resonate at that higher frequency. This permanently expands the student's biological and spiritual capacity to channel the ki. It is the exact engineered solution that Usui was looking for: democratized access to the universal connection without having to go starve on a mountain.
And the immediate physical aftermath of this download varies wildly from person to person. Some people report immense heat radiating from their hands, or visual phenomena like seeing intense colors, or even spontaneous emotional releases, and it initiates a mandatory 21-day clearing process.
Which isn't just an arbitrary number.
Right. The philosophy assumes that once you widen a pipe to push a massive amount of new water through it, all the accumulated hardened sediment in that pipe gets knocked loose. So the 21 days represents the biological and emotional system processing and flushing out old, stagnant trauma that can no longer coexist with the new, higher frequency.
And the integration of this frequency is so highly individualized. The text details one student who felt entirely numb and disappointed during her attunement seminar. She thought it didn't work.
Oh yeah, the subway story.
Yes. Later, she is writing the London Underground, which is a loud, stressful, highly dense environment. She puts on her headphones and is listening to some music. I think it was a Prince song. And in that specific moment, isolated on a chaotic subway train, her hands suddenly become ice cold, the energetic flow activates, and the structural connection just clicks into place.
That's amazing.
It is. The system engages precisely when the individual psychology is internally receptive to it.
And once it is engaged, the physical application is incredibly safe and straightforward. The UK's National Occupational Standards officially state that palm healing has no known contraindications. It doesn't interact negatively with pharmaceuticals, pacemakers, or pregnancy.
It's completely non-invasive.
Yeah. A practitioner simply moves through a sequence of 9 basic hand positions, starting at the head and moving down the body. The fundamental mechanical rule is that the practitioner is not diagnosing the illness or forcefully pushing the energy. The energy supposedly possesses its own intelligence and directs itself to wherever the recipient's system is structurally deficient. So the download of the capability is instantaneous, but the mastery, that daily polishing of those 3 diamonds, that takes a lifetime.
To synthesize the scope of this deep dive, we are really looking at a system born from the total socioeconomic collapse of a Japanese samurai. Mikao Usui navigated extreme asceticism to discover a profound universal connection, but his true genius lay in engineering the attunement ritual, a mechanism to basically bypass the suffering and transfer that connection directly to the public.
It's a framework that completely rejects the isolation of the physical body. It relies instead on the tandem points to merge Earth's grounding hardware with heaven's intuitive data, all of it processed through the empathy of the heart.
And it completely reframes the ultimate objective of medicine. It shifts the goalpost from merely curing a localized physical symptom to holing the entire human being across their physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual planes.
That's a massive paradigm shift.
It is. And I want to leave you with one final thought to consider. Kind of stepping away from the Japanese kanji and the quantum physics theories for a moment, we operate in a deeply fragmented, highly digitized society where genuine focused attention is arguably our rarest commodity.
Absolutely true.
Consider the sheer neurological impact of the Reiki posture itself. What happens to a person's highly frazzled sympathetic nervous system when another human being simply stops, sits beside them, places their hands on their body, and focuses their entire undivided intention solely on their well-being?
Just the act of doing that.
Exactly. Even if we strip away every metaphysical and historical claim in this text, that act of unconditional, focused human presence is a profound disruption to our modern isolation. Perhaps that level of intentional touch is its own fundamental mechanism for healing.
That is a very powerful disruption to think about. Whether you view it through the lens of universal life energy or just the profound biological impact of human connection, the framework really asks us to look beyond the immediate symptom and see the whole system. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics and philosophy of Reiki Made Easy. Keep questioning, keep looking past the surface, and we will catch you next time.